According to the CDC, anxiety and depression are up 400%. It's probably not a surprise to you. We've been going through a tough time as a nation and as a people. And that anxiety has been eating away at our happiness. That worry is what kills our joy. And for the writer of Ecclesiastes, the preacher, it's fair to say that he's been on a search for joy and happiness. The book of Ecclesiastes is the written record of his search for the meaning of life. And he tried to find happiness. He tried to find pleasure in money and riches. And this book shows us that he failed miserably in accomplishing it himself, but he learned enough to be able to pass on some wisdom to his readers and also to us. Now, in the last couple of weeks, one of his big frustrations has been the fact that it doesn't seem like there's a difference between what happens to a good person and what happens to a bad person. Multiple times he said this, that there's nothing different between the good and the evil. The same thing happens to them. As a matter of fact, sometimes bad things happen to good people, but the evil people go unpunished. Last week, his suggestion was to avoid extremes. Don't be too good or don't be too evil. But this week, in chapter 9, he has some additional suggestions, and I believe they'll surprise you. Before we get there, let's look at this first section. Starting in verse 2, he says, "It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and to him who does not sacrifice. As is the good, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all." Now, the preacher is talking about death. He's saying that no matter what you do, good or evil, no matter if you take oaths or don't do oaths, no matter if you sacrifice or don't sacrifice, what's going to happen is eventually you're going to die. Verse 5, he says, "For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no reward, for the memory of them is forgotten." Here's what he's saying. Listen carefully. He's saying if you're reading this, you're still alive. If you're reading this, you still have time. It's not too late. It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, maybe one of yours too, Dead Poet Society with Robin Williams. One of the most famous scenes. It's so good. Let's just take a second and watch it.
"Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Old time is still a flag. And this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying."
Thank you, Mr. Pitts. "Gather ye rosebuds while ye may." The Latin term for that sentiment is carpe diem. Who knows what that means? Carpe diem. That's seize the day. Very good, Mr. Meeks. Meeks. Another unusual name. Seize the day. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Why does the writer use these lines?
Because he's in a hurry.
No. Ding! Thanks for playing anyway. Because we are food for worms, lads. Because believe it or not, each and every one of us in this room is one day going to stop breathing, turn cold, and die. I'd like you to step forward over here and peruse some of the faces from the past. You've walked past them many times. I don't think you've really looked at them. They're not that different from you, are they? Same haircuts, full of hormones, just like you. Invincible, just like you feel. The world is their oyster. They believe they're destined for great things, just like many of you. Their eyes are full of hope, just like you. Did they wait until it was too late to make from their lives even one iota of what they were capable? Because you see, gentlemen, these boys are now fertilizing daffodils. If you listen real close, you can hear them whisper their legacy to you. Go on, lean in. Listen. You hear it?
If the writer of Ecclesiastes would have known Latin, I believe he would have said right here, seize the day. And so he gives some advice in 3 parts. We'll work our way through those, and I'm going to give you a challenge in each one. Write this down if you're taking notes. Here's his first piece of advice. Enjoy your food and drink. Enjoy your food and drink. Look at verse 7. Go, eat your bread in joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Now, at first, this sounds like hedonism, right? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. But remember to read this verse in the context of what the preacher has said already multiple times. In chapter 2, verse 24, 3, 12, and 13, 3:22, 5:18, and 8:15. Over and over again, he said these exact words. And when you look at them closely, what you realize is there's something more than just eat, drink, and be merry. It's eat and drink, for this is the gift that God has given to you. You see, he recognizes here the source of these simple pleasures. And that's really the key to finding joy and pleasure. When the preacher recognized the source of the simple pleasures, he realized he could experience the joy. He recognized God as the source. Now, there's a powerful lesson for us here, and it's this. It doesn't matter how much you have, you'll enjoy it when you appreciate it. And you'll appreciate it when you know who provides it. God provides it. It's just like the writer of James said in chapter 1, verse 17. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Here the preacher adds another dimension. He's saying God has already approved what you do. The eating and the drinking and the finding joy, God has already approved it, meaning that's part of God's plan and design. I'm sure that he was thinking back to the garden. Remember, when God created mankind, he placed them in a perfect garden with all of the fruits and vegetables that we have today, and maybe even more. That enjoyment was given to people by God. I want you to do me a favor. Don't lose your place in the book of Ecclesiastes, but I want to go all the way to the very beginning of the Bible, to Genesis chapter 1. Turn with me there. Genesis chapter 1. This is the account of God creating the earth and placing Adam and Eve in this garden. And if we go to the 29th verse, it says this. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for what? For food. Think of this for a second. There are 5 basic flavors that we enjoy: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. That's sort of a savory flavor. God created those flavors for you to taste. And then what he did is he put taste buds into your mouth so that you could enjoy those flavors. Did you know that you have as many as 10,000 taste buds on your tongue? You know those little bumps on your tongue? Those aren't actually taste buds. Each one of those bumps has between 8 and 10 different taste buds. And on your tongue, there's different places where different tastes happen. In the front, for example, is like sweet, and sour is on the back. And it's an amazing thing. God created you to enjoy the flavors he created. How many people like chocolate? God created you to enjoy chocolate. How many people love coffee? God created you to enjoy coffee. How many people love ice cream? Pizza. How about a nice cold beer when you're working in the garden? And it's church. You can still raise your hand if you want. Be honest. God created you. They're gifts from God. Listen to what the psalmist says in chapter 104, verses 14 and 15. He says, you cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth. The psalmist understands that God brought these things as a gift. So here's my challenge to you. The next time you're eating a meal, whether it's a $50 steak or a homemade peanut butter and jelly sandwich, stop and savor the flavors of the food that you're eating. Remember that God created the most delicious things for you, like strawberries and pineapple and even flaming hot Cheetos. And God approves when we enjoy what he provided. Maybe this has happened to you. Maybe you had somebody over to your house and you wanted to cook them a special meal. So you went out to the store and you bought a bunch of special ingredients. You knew they were coming over at a certain time, and so you started cooking and you put all of your heart and soul into this meal. And then when they showed up, you sat down to eat, and you didn't take a bite first. You watched them to see what their reaction would be, so that when they took a bite of the food you prepared, you wanted to see, did they appreciate it? Did they like it? And when they did, you felt this feeling like, oh, I'm so glad I could do that for you. That's the feeling God has when we appreciate the food and drink that he's given to us. Now, some of you are like, well, I don't really know how to appreciate food. I just eat food so I don't die. Well, I can give you some tips. Now, these aren't from the Bible. These are Pastor Phil's tips for enjoying your food. Number one, you should eat better food. I know we live in a culture where we fly around, we eat a lot of fast food, whatever happens to be around us. But you know what? If you eat better food, you will appreciate it more. You can slow down when you eat too. I think this is a problem that so many of us have. I mean, I know it's funny. My wife and I, we joke about this. We'll spend 3 or 4 hours making Thanksgiving meal and 15 minutes to eat it. In other cultures, they slow down and they actually enjoy their food, a lot of times with company. One thing you can do to enjoy your food more, I believe, is cook more and cook together. When you do your own cooking, number one, the food is better. It's probably healthier for you. And I do think you gain an appreciation from the process of putting together flavors. And the last thing, and this is obvious, if you want to learn to appreciate the gifts that God has given you when it comes to food, pray before your meals. Pray before your meals. Take a moment and thank God, not just for the food that's on your table, but for the miraculous flavors that it has, the good things that it has that you love. Now, I know that somebody here is going to say, you know, Pastor Phil, that we said we should eat, and that means eat as much as I can. No, that's not what the writer of Ecclesiastes is saying either. There's lots of other areas of the Bible that talk about gluttony. But he's saying the food that you eat in moderation, learn to enjoy it because God has already approved that for you. So here's the second thing. Write this down. Enjoy your life. Enjoy your life. Look at verse 8. Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Now, there's a cultural significance here. At this time in history, if somebody had died or if there was something bad going on, you would wear dark clothes. You would wear maybe even like a different kind of fabric, like sackcloth or something. But when you were joyful, you would wear white. It was a sign of purity. Also very comfortable in the sun. And oil throughout the Bible has many uses for cooking, for healing, and also, though, for protection for your skin. In a dry and arid climate, that oil was sort of like a moisturizer, and it's also symbolic of the Spirit of God. So when the preacher says to wear white and anoint your head with oil, he's saying this: be joyful, be glad, and let other people know about it too. Advertise the fact that you feel blessed. Advertise the fact that God has been good. Advertise the fact that you're joyful. Don't hide it. Show it to everybody. Now, if you're having trouble being happy, I have a a book besides the Bible that I love to recommend. This is by one of my favorite authors, Dennis Prager. The book is called Happiness is a Serious Problem, a Human Nature Repair Manual. One of the things that he says in this book that's always stuck with me is he says, you owe it to yourself, but more so other people, to be happy. Happy people have more friends. Happy people have more success in life. And you know, you say, well, it's really not like a switch that you can turn on and turn off. Okay, I agree with that. But you know what? You can work at it. And the preacher is saying to do that, to enjoy your life. He says, you still have time. Now, you might be sitting here or you might be watching thinking, yeah, but I'm going through something really tough right now. Maybe you've lost a friend to an illness or COVID. Maybe there's something going on financially in your life. Maybe you are just overwhelmed with worry. Well, remember what the preacher said in chapter 3. He said there's a time for everything, right? He said there's a time to weep and a time to laugh. I think the preacher's working toward a common theme by the end of this book, basically saying don't waste much of your life like I did. Take advantage of joy by recognizing God's good gift. And for those of you that are married, he takes it a step further. Look at verse 9. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he has given you under the sun. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the preacher's talking about emotional love, but I believe he's also talking about physical love, intimacy between a husband and a wife. And just like we went back to the garden and we see that God created foods to be enjoyed in the beginning, he also created companionship when he gave Eve to Adam and put them together. What does the Bible say in the book of Genesis? You've heard this a lot at most weddings. I'll put it up on the screen. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become what? One flesh. Now, this is the part that you don't hear much at weddings, but it's the very next verse. And the man and his wife were both naked, and they were not ashamed. It's interesting. There's always been this tendency in Christianity towards asceticism. Asceticism is this idea where it's holy and good to deny yourself pleasure. That true spirituality would shun certain things that are pleasurable. Like a true spiritual person, they have their nose up in the air and they don't want to enjoy good food. That's too much pleasure. They don't want to have wine. They don't want to have sex. They would rather just put these things to the side because they have more holy things to focus on. Well, I believe true spirituality, according to the preacher, is the full enjoyment of the things that God made for us within the context of how God created us to enjoy them. The preacher says, don't waste more time. Enjoy the good gifts God gave you. That's true spirituality. Now, somebody here might say, oh, Pastor Phil said we should have sex. When you're married, after you're married, should you have sex? Yes. Lots of it. Not before. This is about a husband and a wife. He says it right there. So here's a challenge for you, for those of you who are married. If you've been lacking in this area, the preacher says, go for it. If you've been lacking in this area, the preacher says, this is one of the gifts that God has given you. Don't waste your time. Take advantage of this. Here's the third suggestion. If you're taking notes, jot this down. Enjoy your work. Work hard. Look at the second part of verse 9 and verse 10. It says, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol, that means the grave, to which you're going. Now, he said this before, and we've said it too in our series, that the work we have from God is a gift. It's part of his original plan. Even before mankind had fallen in the garden, when Adam and Eve were placed there in perfection, God expected them to take care of that garden and tend it, to work it. Now, I realize that some people here have a challenge when it comes to work because maybe they hate their job, or they hate their boss, or they hate their employees, or they don't like their customers. And it feels meaningless and pointless. And work can sometimes feel that way. But just like in the two previous ideas, I believe this involves a shift in thinking. It involves understanding who you're really working for. Let's go, don't lose your place again, but let's go to the New Testament, to the book of Colossians for a moment. The book of Colossians. You'll find it in there's a bunch of letters that Paul wrote to some cities in the early church. You'll see Galatians, you'll see Ephesians, you'll see Philippians, and then you'll see Colossians. Colossians chapter 3. Now remember something. This letter to the Colossians is a letter written to a church just like ours. Regular people, families who are learning to follow Christ. And many of them were in a situation where their work was less than satisfactory. Here's what it says starting in chapter 3, verse 22. Bondservants, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters, not by way of eye service as people pleasers, but with sincerity of heart, fearing the Lord. Now, verse 23. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. Now, some translations out there might actually have the word slave instead of bondservant. And the reason why it says bondservant is because if you use the word slave there, it sort of tends to conjure up an image of antebellum, sort of pre-Civil War slavery that was based on racial inequality and racism. That's not what's happening here. In the early world, as many as a third of all Roman citizens would have been bondservants to somebody else. They would have worked for somebody else or even been owned by somebody else. Now, the Bible doesn't condone slavery. It just recognizes it's a fact of life. What's interesting is in this church in Colossae, Paul is writing this encouragement to people in the church who were bondservants to other people in that same church. So imagine sitting in a building like this, a bondservant with their master right next to each other. Because later Paul has some information for the masters. He says, masters, treat your bondservants justly and fairly. Now, getting that out of the way, let me get to his point. His point is this. If you don't like being a bondservant, don't do your work as if it's for your master on earth. Do your work as if it's for your master in heaven. Because when you do that, God will be pleased. Don't try to please people. Please God. That's the most important thing. So if you're stuck in a job or you're stuck in a situation that you don't like, one helpful thing is to adjust your attitude and go, okay, I'm not working for these customers. I'm not working for this boss. I'm working for God. And according to the preacher and according to Paul, we should do it with all of our might to the best of our ability. Whatever you do the best you can. That means if you're a carpenter, measure twice, cut once. If you're a plumber, make sure there are no leaks. If you're a mechanic, be honest in your billing. If you're a preacher, keep it short. Here's my last challenge. This week while you're working, whether you're in business, whether you're a homemaker, whether you work in a school, whether you work on a farm, no matter what you do a heavenly performance evaluation on yourself. The question you would ask is, would you hire you to do what you're doing? Would God hire you to do what you're doing? Do you need an attitude change, or maybe a new job or career. That's a reality too. But as we conclude, let me just light a fire under you with this passage. Look at the last two verses, verse 11 and 12. We didn't read over them earlier, but they're kind of haunting. Now listen, he says, "Again I saw that under the sun the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. For man does not know his time. Like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare, so the children of man are snared at an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them." What's he saying? Nobody knows how long they have. Nobody knows how long. You'll never know what day will be the shortest day that you have on this earth. And like a bird caught in a trap, he says, it can happen like that. So what are you waiting for, he says. In verse 7, he says it right at the beginning. You can hear the urgency. He says, go. Whatever you're doing, stop doing that and go. Enjoy your food and drink. God's given it to you as a gift. Enjoy your life. Be happy. Celebrate. Enjoy your marriage. Enjoy your work. Do it with all your might. Why? Because we don't know how long we have. We need to enjoy every gift that God has given us. That's my prayer for you. Let's close.